Macy Neely is a social media star, a cast member of The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, and now a best-selling author. Her memoir, Told You So, was released in October 2025 and became an instant bestseller. At 30 years old, you may be wondering, how does this woman have enough to fill a whole memoir? Well, let me tell you, she has really been through it. She's experienced a lot of trauma, and that's the topic of this book. The book deals with heavy and relevant subjects such as abuse and grief, but it's not one that I necessarily recommend. I read it so you don't have to, and I have a lot of thoughts. Let's get into it. Macy is different from some of the other women on the Mormon Wives TV show because she didn't actually grow up in Utah. She grew up in California, where there are fewer Mormon families, and so she describes her family as being not as strict as a lot of the Mormon families in Utah. And that had an impact on her upbringing, but at the same time, reading this as obviously a non-Mormon person, I was really shocked by a lot of the things that she relates about Mormon culture and how the family dealt with various issues that she experienced. And to me, it seemed like she grew up in a very conservative household. And to me, while she had the freedom to dress as she wanted and perhaps engage in more activities than potentially Mormon women growing up in Utah, to me, the emotional valence of her family seemed very conservative and strict, I think in many ways to her detriment, and that was what really stuck out to me the most about her book. She describes growing up in a fairly wealthy and privileged background, and apparently she was a very good tennis player. She was on the national level. She had multiple scholarship opportunities to basically attend whatever college she wanted to. But her sister, who was the tennis coach at Brigham Young University in Utah, basically pressured her into attending that school, even though Macy wasn't sure she wanted to. And the book very briefly talks about how the sister may have actually signed her acceptance for her, but doesn't dwell on it too much, which I found very strange because that's a huge decision to make for somebody else. One of the things that's interesting about this book is she never really seems to reflect much on the situations that are happening to her. It's told in the present tense for the most part. It kind of just relates the events that are happening as they happen to her, but without much reflection or thought about why these things are happening. And even though the book talks about these really intimate things in her life, we never really get a glimpse strongly into her feelings, which she does acknowledge at various points in the book that she doesn't really like to think of herself as an emotion-driven person. She likes to try to be logical, which she's sort of an unreliable narrator, but she claims that she doesn't really like to share her feelings, which I think does show through in the text because it doesn't ever really talk a whole lot about her feelings. Sometimes we get an action like, oh, I cried, in relation to this or something, but she doesn't really talk about why she's feeling things, what she's feeling, and doesn't very much go into depth on why these things are happening to her, many of which I believe are driven by the conservative religious environment that she grew up in. So she doesn't spend a lot of time talking about her childhood and her teenage years, other than that to relate that her family is pretty well off. There's a story about how the family pranks her where she had a dream car that she wanted when she learned how to drive, and they gave her an old beat up version for Christmas. So she was kind of disappointed, but then it turns out they had the new version of the car hidden. And it was supposed to be this funny prank, which was kind of an interesting insight, I think, into the family's financial situation. So they were well off. She had a lot of tennis camps and tennis training, and she was basically in line to be the star tennis player at BYU. And she alludes to having some interest in a professional tennis career after school, although it's not really clear to me how much she really wanted that, because as we go on into the book, later on she seems sort of ambivalent about it. It seems that her expectation that her family has for her is that she'll become a wife and a mother after college, and she never really seems to question that. It seems like she's kind of okay with that expectation. So she starts her college years at BYU, everything is great, but then she meets the boyfriend who will become her abuser, and I think this was a really harrowing experience to read about. It made me really feel for her. It was quite interesting how she described sort of how this guy pushed the envelope. So, he started out small and then he got more and more abusive with her over time. A big part of her presence on social media, apparently, I'm not really on social media a whole lot, but she says that one of the reasons she even started social media in the first place is because she really wanted to share her story with women, to help them realize that having an abusive boyfriend is not okay, to maybe recognize similarities to the situations that she was in. And I admire the courage that it took for her to come out with this and to talk about that and to try to help other women by sharing her story. Something that was really disturbing to me, beyond obviously the abuse, which was really horrible and harrowing to read about, was I personally feel, as a now non-religious person, I did grow up in a religious home, but it was a liberal religious home, not at all like the conservative environment that's described in this book. It seems to me that a lot of the conservative religious beliefs that she grew up with really influenced her into accepting a lot of the things that happened to her, and I think contributed to a lot of the problems that she experienced later on. And so it was very frustrating for me to read about this in the first place, to read about the ways in which patriarchal religion is very harmful to women, when that internalized misogyny is embedded so deep that there's just sort of this acceptance by the woman of the idea that she doesn't have value in certain situations. It honestly made me feel really sad for her that I think the religion fueled some of these experiences she went through. For instance, a lot of it was around sexual purity. There's this belief in Mormon culture that you should never have sex before you're married, and if you do, then you're bad and broken. And it was clear that this really impacted Macy throughout her experiences with her various boyfriends. The abusive boyfriend pressured her into things she didn't want to do, and when he eventually got his way, she then felt like she was tainted goods. And so in a way, she felt like it didn't matter if she continued to go along with him. And this is in my own words. She doesn't describe it this way. Although she does talk about like the feeling of, oh, no one will ever want me now, which is just, it's so heartbreaking to read that. And it made me feel very deeply sad for her that she ever had to feel that way, that like, oh, somebody, did this thing to her, and therefore she's tainted goods. And so it doesn't really matter what happens now. And she almost like doesn't have a reason to not accept it and to be like, I deserve better, I deserve respect, because her culture taught her this. So there were a lot of like ups and downs with the abusive boyfriend. He eventually got violent with her. He eventually assaulted her. It's horrible to read about. And if you're expecting this to be sort of a frothy memoir, because she's on social media and she's involved in the reality show, it actually is not. It's very heavy and is definitely upsetting to read about, so be prepared for that if you do decide to read the book. Eventually, fortunately, she was able to get away from the abusive boyfriend, and then she starts dating a baseball player who seems like he's a wonderful guy. They have some ups and downs in their relationship just because like they have struggles with communicating. And I think also the other thing that really struck me was how much the culture of growing up in this conservative religious environment sort of pressures people to like make decisions too soon, because there's this prohibition against premarital sex, and there's this like idea that you're probably going to get married young, or you should get married young so that you can engage in activities with the person that you're interested in, and it's okay. It felt like they were just, to me, it felt like they were really rushing into things that they shouldn't have been. The other thing that was just like really mind-boggling to me is, so she actually likes this guy. And this second boyfriend, his name is Eric, and he treats her well. She's happy with him, so it's wonderful. It's like, yay, she has this good boyfriend finally. They don't feel that they're able to use birth control. Birth control is prohibited because you're not supposed to be having any premarital sex. So, but they love each other and they can't help it. And so they engage in intimate activities together, which I believe as a liberal person should be fine. Like, I don't think anybody should be telling you what you should do as a consenting adult when both people want to participate. To me, that's really crazy that someone would be policing your body and your life in that way. And it seems really odd to think that God would care about that to me. Like, even when I believed in God, I didn't ever think, like, it seems like a really small thing for God to be worried about. Like, there's many bigger things that God should probably be keeping track of. She mentioned multiple times this book, I guess that's common in Mormon circles, that compares sexual sin to being almost as bad as murder, which is just like absolutely mind-boggling to me. So basically, because she and Eric wanted to be together, couldn't really help themselves, kind of kept pushing the boundaries, but were not yet married, they ended up doing it a lot. And she describes how she was taking Plan B all the time because she would, engage and then she would panic. And to me, it was just like, all of these problems could have been avoided if you were just allowed to use birth control. This is so crazy. Like, we have the solution for this problem. Eventually, she gets pregnant, supposedly unplanned, but that is what happens when you engage in unprotected sex eventually for many people. Reading about what happened during and after this pregnancy was so devastating. The way her family reacts is absolutely horrifying. And it was also very sad for me that she doesn't really question her family's reaction at all. There's kind of this attitude of like, oh, well, I deserved to be treated this way because I engaged in sin, which is like just deeply sad to read about. So there's multiple layers to this. One is that she has to leave BYU because she knows she'll get kicked out for breaking the honor code, which prohibits engaging in any kind of premarital activity. And she's also been partying on the side. She knows that she could get kicked out, and she's advised to basically, I think maybe she takes a leave of absence. You know, the school is absolutely not going to support her. When she tells her parents, because she's going to need a place to live while she gives birth and then has a newborn, her mom tells her that she's a slut. Like, that's the first thing her mom says to her. That is so horrible. And I feel so terrible that somebody ever said this to poor Macy. That is unacceptable. And the other thing that really bothered me about it too was that, so it seems that in Mormon culture and also like in many conservative religious cultures, there's this idea that like it's good for women to have a lot of children, but you know, it can't happen in any way. It has to happen in the specified way. You have to be married. You have to be married in a straight marriage, and then you can have all these kids. And if you don't have lots of kids, it's bad. But if you have a baby in the wrong way, too soon, or like premaritally, or like not in the exact proper way, then it's like she's absolutely shamed by her family for it. And it's horrible because it's like, great. So this is so controlling. It's completely unacceptable to tell a woman that like she's doing the thing that she's supposed to, becoming a mother, but like not in the exact correct way, which I found really appalling. And then her sister, so one of her older sisters is also pregnant, and the sister, Macy describes her as being like furious that Macy is supposedly stealing the spotlight from her. And the sister's like really mean to her when she moves home, because there's this thing that it's like, oh, the sister's married, she got pregnant the right way, she needs to enjoy her moment in the spotlight. And Macy did it the wrong way, and she's stealing the spotlight. And to me, that was also really disturbing, because it's like, okay, if the most important thing that a woman can do is giving birth, then it's like they're like competing with each other to be the one in the spotlight and like the one that's being celebrated. And it was like so disturbing, because it's like, is it wonderful to be a mother? Yes. Like, should we be able to celebrate both of them? Yes. Like, they should not have to compete and be like, oh, well, which one did it the right way? And I suspect, you know, even if Macy had done it the so-called right way, I bet there still would be competition, which is just horrific. Her dad is like really weirdly possessive of her, and for some reason was like really against the relationship with Eric, which I don't understand, because Eric seemed like a really nice guy. I mean, he didn't have all of his life together, but he seemed like he treated Macy well and they were really happy together. The dad was like really against them being together. At one point, she mentioned wanting to marry Eric, and the dad was just like, no, you will not. And at this point, Macy's like 20 years old, so she is an adult. I mean, she's a young adult. Like, I would think that's on the young side to get married, but she is an adult. She is a woman who can make her own choices. And I found it really disturbing and weird how much this dad seemed to like be really possessive over her. Something else that I forgot to talk about is that both when she's with the abusive boyfriend and then when she's with Eric, she's expected to confess everything that she's done and like in graphic detail to her bishop, which is just like so appalling to think of, like this young woman having to tell an older man like all of the things that she's done with her body. She has to tell him so that he can then judge her and she can repent. And the thing that was interesting was like, she talks about, so there's like a couple different bishops that she engages with over the course of the story. And some of the bishops are like more forgiving, and they're like, okay, you know, you made a mistake, but you can like get back on track. And then there's like this one guy that's just horrible to her and is like, you have sinned, you need to repent. Apparently it takes a whole year to repent for sexual sin. She has to do all these things to get back in the church's good graces. Also, as a BYU athlete, she has to have a recommendation from an ecclesiastical member. And this guy basically tells her, like, I will not recommend you because you've sinned so badly. It was troubling to me that she perceived this as like, oh, this bishop is good and this one is mean or whatever, but not like, it's a problem in general that you need to disclose very personal details to these men who should have no authority over what you are doing in your private life. Something else that was just very sad about the book was like how little she knew about her own body. So she describes the very first time back when she's with the abusive boyfriend, he forces her to give him a hand job, when he reaches his climax, she's scared because she didn't know that that was going to happen. And she's like, oh my goodness, what is happening? She describes when she feels her own impulses arising and, she experiences changes down there. She's like scared and she thinks something's wrong with her because she was never told or like allowed to, experiment with her own body, that these are normal things, like these are healthy things for a woman to experience. And that just like made me so angry because it was like, these people set her up to be so alienated from herself, to feel so like a stranger in her own body, that I feel like it kind of set her up for these various experiences that just like set her up to fail in a way. Also, at some point when she's dating Eric, but before she gets pregnant, his parents like start to suspect that they've been engaging in activities together, and the parents sit them down to talk to them and be like, this is bad, you shouldn't be doing this. That is so creepy. What? Like, his parents, that is none of their business. Like, that's really weird. When she is pregnant, she talks about how she really wavers between like being happy and like being really upset that she cannot continue on the plan that she had, at least for the next few years. She did want to be a mother, but she wasn't expecting it to happen so soon. She was expecting it to happen, when she was a good married wife, and she thought maybe she'd play tennis for a few years and then do that. She talks about how she really went through periods of strong depression, and she even admits that she considered getting an abortion, or like the thought crossed her mind that that might be something she would want, and then she didn't do it because of her beliefs. I admired the courage that it took for her to admit that. However, I was very frustrated that she then goes on to say that she supports women having the right to choose, and she tries to say that like her views have changed and she supports people like not necessarily having to live by these really strict religious rules. And yet later in the book, she talks about how she's a good Mormon now, and she tithes, and she's a member of the church, and she teaches whatever their equivalent is of Sunday school. And I was just kind of like, okay, so you say you support these things, and maybe in your heart you support people having the freedom to make various choices about their own lives and bodies, and yet you contribute significant amounts of time and money to an organization that actively prevents people and very strongly tries to give them the idea that they should not have these choices. What are you really doing here? What is the actual outcome that you are creating in this world? When her parents are being really horrible to her about the premarital sex and the pregnancy, there's a really sad quote where she says, I don't feel like I deserve anything right now, not even happiness. And I feel like that's sort of the theme that underlies this whole thing, where a lot of this bad stuff that happened to her, like she didn't necessarily like fight back strongly against it because she was like, oh, well, I deserve this for sinning. So the other thing that's really horrible, and which she alludes to like right in the beginning of the book, is that Eric dies before the baby is ever born. He dies in a car accident, and it seems that he's really emotional and texting her because they were in the middle of a fight when he actually dies in the car accident, which I can't even imagine. I mean, to have your significant other alone dying in a car accident, terribly tragic. To have them die while you're pregnant with your child together is just, I can't even imagine. And she does talk about the deep depression that she went into. And then she considered giving the baby up for adoption. Eric's parents wanted to adopt the baby. Like, this is their grandchild. They want a piece of their son. These parents are grieving. Macy's dad is so vindictive that he says no, they cannot adopt the baby. Just because he doesn't want them to have it, because he hates Eric so much for some reason, that he prevents them from adopting their own grandchild. Like, this man he's so controlling and so scary. Macy also talks about how her very wealthy parents, the ones who could afford to buy her a fancy new car and to live in a gigantic house, they don't believe in supporting her because she sinned, and so she has to go on WIC support from the government to pay for food for her baby, which I found very interesting because that support should absolutely be there for women, infants, and children who need it. Does she need it? I mean, I guess technically the parents are not required to support her because she is an adult at this point, but they choose not to, like, as a way to punish her, which is very questionable. So she talks about like going through financial stress because she didn't have any money. She's like a 20-year-old with a newborn baby. Her parents do help with the babysitting, but they won't contribute any financial support to her. So she goes on government assistance. And you know what else I was wondering? I was very much wondering, if the parents in this conservative religion vote for candidates who support the government to support people like this. So there are just so many insane things in this book. And I really admire Macy's strength and resiliency in not only getting through all of these really crazy and traumatic events, but also then sort of reliving them through writing it all out. That must have been very hard for her, and she's very brave to do it. In the end, Macy gets her life back on track. She's able to start playing tennis again. Unfortunately, an injury ends up really destroying her career, like finally, which is very sad because she worked so hard to try to get back after having a baby. Eventually, she does meet a wonderful new guy, and despite various questions about whether he's going to go on a mission or not, because young Mormon men are sort of expected to go on a mission to try to convert people to the religion, but he ultimately decides not to stay with Macy and the child, which was really touching to read about, that he was like, so the family, being in a family with them was so important that he was like, you know what, I'm not going to go on a mission. He really went back and forth on it, but ultimately he decided not to. That was very heartwarming to read, that she eventually ended up with the right person, and I loved that for her. Ultimately, I found it very confusing that in the end, like toward the end of the book, Macy talks about being a member of the Mormon community and, you know, doing the things that she's supposed to, the tithing and the church attendance. And I found that really interesting because when I was growing up, I was a member of a Christian family, and it was very important to me. Fortunately for me, my family was very liberal, which I so much appreciate now in retrospect. We didn't have any of the purity culture stuff going on. We didn't have anything in our church where like, oh, women are lesser than men. Women were allowed to preach, and actually a woman my age who was in my church is a pastor now, and I'm so proud of her. I think that's very cool. So there wasn't a lot of this like conservative stuff going on, and yet I found it to ultimately be restrictive and to not align with what I observed about the world. And while I believe liberal Christianity is a wonderful framework with which to live your life, if you find that to be a meaningful way for you to live, and I think it gives a lot of people meaning, and I know many wonderful progressive Christians who are amazing people who love their neighbors like they're supposed to, and, you know, really engage in the community and do public service and actually follow the ways of Jesus. So like, I think that's awesome and amazing. At the same time, I was not able ultimately to really say like, yes, I believe these things, because the things that I observed about the world to me didn't make sense with the things that I was told in the religion. And then eventually I left because I was like, well, to me, this doesn't work as a framework through which to understand the world or live my life. And I feel quite strongly that you can live a moral life as a good person and not believe in God. It was kind of crazy to me in light of that all these horrible things happened to Macy, I think arguably because of the religion that she's raised with. And she never questions it. Like, she never seems to, like, she, you know, she thinks it's like the work of individual bad actors. So, you know, it's like, oh, this bishop was mean to me, or like, this rule at BYU was a little restrictive, but not like the overall thing, where in the Mormon community, there's this attitude of really like policing women. They're lesser than men. They're not allowed to have leadership in the church. They're not allowed control over their own bodies, because when you can't decide, you know, as a consenting adult, what you want to do with your own body, you don't have control over that. And it was interesting to me that, like, in many ways, her story was illustrative of how destructive this can be, because the whole time I was just like, if this poor woman, first of all, believed that she deserved respect and happiness, if she actually believed that, if she like believed in her worth as a human being, I feel like she probably would not have put up with a lot of the behavior that she was experiencing from like these people in her community. I mean, it was the boyfriends, but it was also her parents and her sister and like the boyfriend's parents. Like, I just can't even imagine thinking that it would be acceptable for someone to treat me that way. And also, if she just had access to birth control, like, so many of these problems could be avoided. Like, she wouldn't have had to be taking Plan B all the time. She wouldn't have had to, like, she was always, like, so worried about the guilt she was feeling and, like, worried about hiding what she was doing and having to repent and this whole cycle. And I was just like, this is this huge emotional burden that she shouldn't even have to be dealing with. Like, life is hard enough without having to feel like everyday human activities that are not bad are like this horrible thing that you have to be ashamed of. Like, the shame ran so deep throughout her book that I just was like, this is crazy. She shouldn't even have to be dealing with this. And yet, here she is, a member of the church today, supporting an organization that is in many ways very oppressive, not only towards its own members, but in its lobbying efforts within the state of Utah to control the lives of people who are not Mormons. And if she truly doesn't believe that these rules should necessarily apply to Mormons, why is she participating in an organization and giving it so much time and money when it tries to enforce those rules? And the Mormon Church is very influential in the state of Utah and in the state of Utah government. And it's very concerning to me as a non-religious person that these religious organizations that I've never had anything to do with, and even if I were still a liberal Christian, I would still strongly disagree with what they're doing. They should have absolutely no influence over my life, and yet they do, and they're trying to exert that influence. We see this with the Catholic Church as well, where they have lots of lobbying efforts to try to control what choices non-Catholic women make about their own bodies and their health care. And with the Catholic takeover of so many hospitals in the United States, they're basically trying to spread this, which is just so appalling to me, because it's like, you shouldn't have any control, and I shouldn't have to be worried that, like, when I experience a medical situation that I need to make sure to not go to a Catholic hospital. It's completely unacceptable. And so I did find it kind of disappointing that Macy never really seems to reflect on the organization that she's a part of and like whether these rules are actually in fact a good thing or a bad thing. It was really interesting to me that she never really seems to question whether the rules are bad. So at one point she says, like, oh, I realized now why the Mormon Church has these rules, because if I had followed the rules, I never would have gotten pregnant and all these things wouldn't have happened. And it's like, okay, but also if you had been allowed to have birth control, none of these things would have happened. And like, why is that rule there? I mean, just the idea that like sex is bad is so mind-boggling to me. Like, this is something pretty much every human has done ever since the beginning of time, since humans have ever existed. It's just like really weird to me that there would be this like strong moral prohibition around something that's so natural and so innate. That's really bizarre. And it's like kind of weird to read this book where she goes through all these things that are like largely bad experiences because of that strong moral taboo. And she never seems to like get to the step where it's like, maybe the taboo itself is what's actually hurting me. Ultimately, Macy finds success through blogging, Instagram, and TikTok, which it seems like is how she really grew her following. I did find it kind of interesting reading about how she grew that social media following, and that's very hard to do. Like, good for her that she was able to take her story, have the courage to share it with people, and, you know, grow this big social media presence basically from nothing. It's a lot of work, and she's very good at it. She has more than 1 million followers across various platforms, so good for her that she was able to make a career out of it. The book promises that there will be insight into the various MomTok drama things that have happened, which I'm only vaguely aware of. There was this so-called soft swinging scandal where they were like swapping partners but not going all the way, and then one of them like talked about it online or something, which I just find really odd, because to me, I'm like, I genuinely don't care what these people are doing. Like, if they, you know, if it was all consensual and whatever, like, I mean, I don't care. I don't get why this was a scandal. I mean, I guess it was a scandal because like they present themselves as being Mormon affiliated on social media, so it was like scandalous because it's like, oh, they're definitely not supposed to do that. Even then, it's like, I mean, I don't really get why people cared that much, but it was like this huge scandal, and then that kind of precipitated them getting the reality TV show deal, which this show, I mean, I've watched a little of it, but I honestly find it very dull, and I just don't find myself to be interested in like the petty dramas that these women have with each other. So I haven't watched the whole thing, only like bits and pieces of it here and there. But apparently the show has been very successful. It's been renewed for several seasons. So, you know, I mean, good for them. Like, good for Macy that she was able to translate her social media posting into this career, which she seems to be very successful at. I feel as a literary person, as someone who studied English in college as my minor, who has read a lot of books, who reads a lot of books actively, who like follows literary news, although not as much as I used to necessarily, but you know, I've been very engaged in book culture. I've been in many, many creative writing classes, and I have a novel that I am about to publish soon. So I feel that I'm like very much engaged in like the literary and publishing and creative writing world, and I find myself unable to complete this video without complaining a bit about the TikTokification of the publishing world. It is quite clear that Macy got this book deal with a major 5 publisher. It was put out by Simon & Schuster because she's a social media and reality TV star, essentially. This is something that has always gone on in publishing. Like, they've always published celebrity memoirs, whether it's like TV celebrities or sports celebrities. And I guess Macy's like a little bit of both, even though her tennis career kind of got shut down before she really achieved the level of success that she probably could have. Like, she was an athlete and she's a social media star, and that's clearly why she got this book deal, because the writing is not great. A lot of celebrities, when they're writing a memoir, they choose to work with a ghostwriter. It's unclear whether Macy did or not. I'm kind of like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like a ghostwriter may have done a better job. So, you know, and ghostwriters, like, they have varying levels of success working with the person. Like, usually the ghostwriter is a professional writer. They're very good, but they also have to incorporate the person's voice and their input and stuff. So some ghostwritten books are more successful than others. One that I thought was really good was Tommy Caldwell, The Climber's memoir, which is a little bit of a shift in topic, but that memoir was really well written, and he worked with a ghostwriter, and he acknowledged the ghostwriter in his acknowledgments, which I really appreciated, because something that very much bothers me is this idea that like anyone can write a book. And I know things have changed with ChatGPT, like it makes it more accessible for people who don't actually have writing skill of their own to like use these large language models and generate this sort of prefab writing, which as a writer deeply offends me in my soul, but that is another topic for another day. Without AI, writing is a skill. I believe it takes talent. That's something people debate about. I believe there's like talent that you need to have. Also, though, it takes a lot of work, and it takes years, even when you have talent, to develop your writing enough to actually become a good writer. It takes skill. It takes practice. It takes years of reading and critiquing and learning. And it really bothers me, first of all, when celebrities don't acknowledge their ghostwriters, because it's like, how dare you? Like, the ghostwriter did the actual work. Like, actually acknowledge the professional who made this happen for you. Second of all, it offends me when people are shocked that a celebrity used a ghostwriter. So like, for instance, the YouTuber Zoe Sugg wrote a novel years ago, and the novel came out and whatever, like it was a big deal, you know, because she's a big deal. People were like really outraged when they found out that a ghostwriter had been involved. And the outrage actually bothered me, because it was like, why do you think that someone like Zoe, who's, you know, very good at social media, is therefore good at writing a book? No, they are not the same thing. And it's like, you, by being surprised that she used a ghostwriter, are sort of like erasing the fact that writing takes time, talent, skill, and practice. I wonder if Macy did not use a ghostwriter, because the writing is really rough. It's very basic. It's very elementary. I was like, it was kind of hard to get through at times, honestly. She writes, and like, I'm guessing that maybe she didn't use a ghostwriter because it doesn't feel professional, or maybe she did and this is her voice. I don't know. Whatever. The outcome of the book is that the writing is very choppy. It's very basic. Even though the story was really interesting, I just felt really frustrated when I was reading it at times, and I had to take breaks because it felt like a child's writing. And I feel like even that is like a disservice to children, because I feel like when I was a child, I had a more sophisticated writing style than this book. I was like, do you know more than 50 words in the English language? Like, it's just very basic. And the thing is, like, you know, she's a social media person. Like, that's her skill set. I cannot be as skilled as she is in social media, because that is something entirely different. And, you know, that's something she's really good at. This idea that, like, because someone is good at TikTok and TV, therefore they should write a book, is, I think, a serious problem in the publishing industry. And like I mentioned earlier, while this has always gone on, and to some extent it used to be that the publishing industry would like publish these celebrity books, and that would in turn subsidize like the literary arm of the publishing industry. The part that really bothers me is it feels like publishing has kind of like entirely gone in the TikTok direction, where they publish books that are either popularized by TikTok, or they're publishing people that are popular on TikTok who are not writers. And, you know, it's like one thing to be like, okay, they need to make money to keep the literary arm afloat, but is the literary arm like even afloat? Because the opportunities for emerging writers who do not have connections, who are not already established in some way, is very, very close to zero at this point. And so it's like they want the money from the celebrities, but they also don't want to do the thing that like originally supposedly publishing was for. F. Scott Fitzgerald back in the day, like roughly 100 years ago, submitting his manuscript and getting like plucked out, and then an editor like working with him like across the course of his career. No, it doesn't happen now. You have to know someone, you have to be connected, and you have to like go through an MFA program. You can't just be an unknown writer and like break in. And like, yeah, okay, it happens here and there, but it is very, very rare, especially if you're not writing to the market. Am I upset because of personal experience? Potentially. And it's just so frustrating to see somebody who's good on TikTok, who's a video person, being given this opportunity, being given this book deal, and, you know, getting that New York Times bestseller stamp. It almost feels like a participation trophy in a way. And like, this isn't about her. Like, I admire her sharing her story. I think she's, you know, it's admirable that she wrote all this out and like shared this with the world to benefit people, especially people like going through abusive relationships, to like give them strength and like give them the tools to recognize like, this is abuse and I need to leave. But did it have to be a book? Did it have to be a book that is then graced with like instant bestseller, which there's all kinds of shady things that go on with the New York Times bestseller list. Bookstores can actually like place mass orders of books to like get them on the list. So it's like, at this point, it's unclear whether that's actually a marker of the book being very successful. And then it's like really interesting when you look at the reviews online, because like the Amazon reviews of just like, you know, general readers posting their reviews are very positive, but the Goodreads ones are not. And the Goodreads ones really call out the writing style and how poorly written the book is. And also just like the lack of depth. Like, it's really disappointing to read a book where it's like, it's so odd to feel like this author shared so many details about her personal life that at times felt even like uncomfortable, where it was like, I don't think I should know this about you. But at the same time, like, there's so little reflection in the book and there's so little interiority that it's like, I feel like I still really don't know anything about her at all. And that was like weirdly disappointing. It was like, this shouldn't be a book. It's not a book. The book reminded me a lot of David Foster Wallace's review of Tracy Austin's book. She was a tennis star, and David Foster Wallace was a tennis player, so he went into her celebrity memoir being really interested to like see what insight she had to tennis. And then it turns out that the book is just like this totally bland, forgettable pack of cliches. And, you know, perhaps because Macy was also a tennis player, this really reminded me of that, where it was like, you know, I would actually be really interested to know about like the inner workings of what it's like to be on social media and like reality TV, and like what's her thought process. But like, the book gives you so little. It's just like sort of all this prefabricated language that's like very surface level, and you come away feeling like you didn't really learn anything about her at all as a person. Even the famous MomTok drama is like packed in and really glossed over at the end of the book. Like, she talks about how like, oh, people are gossiping about this stuff happening on Reddit. And she's sort of like, in the book, I mean, I don't know much about this. I haven't read the Reddit whatevers, like, so I don't know how involved she was or not. In the book, she like is very careful to distance herself from it, and I don't know how accurate that is. But it was like, she didn't give anything juicy. Like, it's just like, why is this a memoir? Like, why? I don't understand. So that was my review of Macy's book. If you're intrigued, go ahead and read it. But if this review saved you several hours of your life reading a book that is perhaps very much not worth it in the end, great. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.